Good evening. Welcome to my introductory video for Dragalia. I made a plan while I couldn't really sleep last night, thinking about how I would introduce it to my friends, because a lot of my friends are into it right now. Um, if you're completely unfamiliar with the topic, this is Dragalia Lost, and it's actually a Nintendo mobile game, and it's the second best selling after Fire Emblem Heroes now. And both of these are not developed by Nintendo specifically. Fire Emblem Heroes is by Intelligent Systems, and this is actually by Cygames, which is one of the bigger names in making mobile games. And Cygames has said that they want it to be the game they're known for, in the way that Game Freak is known for Pokemon, for example. So it is my favorite Nintendo thing right now by quite a mile, and a lot of my friends with Gotcha Burnout have come to it, and it's changed a lot in its year. I've been here since the beginning, and it's become really generous, but in a way that's still kind of satisfying. I'm pretty currency rich right now, so I'm kind of making a video to fill the void because I'm saving. But it's a game that a lot of my friends have said is rewarding in a way a lot of games that we play are not, like idle games, for example, where you're doing a lot of work to get either an event card every week or a rank to be better than people. The big thing I want to point out is that I think it does a good job of rewarding you as it goes, and you're sort of always on a ladder with a rung you can reach. Like, there's basically always something achievable that's better than what you can currently do that's pretty close. So, on a less technical standpoint, it's a game about turning into dragons. It's a game about the bond between humans and dragons, is sort of the gist. But the actual lore of the world is pretty secondary to the characters, I think. And I guess to start, I'll show when you're starting the game, you're going to want to go to campaign, not events, and you unlock a lot of the modes via doing the main story, which has a few chapters. I won't show them all. And these chapters are a bit like homework when you first start the game. It's a mix of stories and really short little battles. Yeah. And this is sort of how the events look too. This is the main content. You've got little fights and little stories, and I think it's a pretty easy consensus that the story, like the heart of it, the main story, isn't the most impressive part of the game, but it's got charm. And the main cast is sort of a Scooby-Doo gang of villains, is how we've kind of come to understand them, where there's a lot of like in jokes, and they can pretty much accomplish anything they put their minds to. But it's a lot less about this main story about families and dragons and this boy getting a country, and a lot more about the people. So I guess I'll show that via this is a good little interface. So up at the top we've got the main cast for the most part, and they're the faces that would get into Smash, and they're not necessarily the most exciting, but as you can see, they just keep making characters. And the fun, I would say, is not in the dragons, but in pulling characters. And if you know like a handful of Nintendo series at this point, you will probably notice that they pull from all of their games when it comes time to make gacha, like Pokemon Masters or Fire Emblem Heroes, and that limits you to the past, more or less. And one big selling point I would say this game has is that it can kind of just pump out a factory of anime tropes, but in a sort of endearing Dragalia way. And as you can probably see from this roll of faces, they have a very signature art style and very unifying flavor. They don't take risks the way something like Grand Blue Fantasy would, maybe. It's a very vanilla game, is certainly the idea. But it's also very Nintendo, and as I talk about the game a bit more, you'll see how it's very shaped by Nintendo. So the one important story part of the game is that your little hero, Prince, oh, you've got Honey Tea, comes into owning an entire country, more or less, this kingdom here, and I guess all the people around it. And you break off from the main empire, and he will house literally anybody he becomes friends with here. So the gist of the game is you're making friends and sort of tackling mysteries of the day, sort of like the Pokemon anime where there's a lot of filler and a lot of faces that show up for one day. But that all kind of comes together to create this big cast of characters, as I mentioned. And there's one portion which is kind of like, I don't know, older mobile games like Farmville. Like, you're definitely taking care of a little village here. So you do your upgrades, and these all buff your adventures. And I won't go too hardcore into explaining the mechanics of the game because there's plenty of guides that do that, but this is what it looks like, and it's prettier than you might expect. That's kind of a big deal, I would say. If you noticed on Chapter 1's little map you explore, they put a lot of detail into the nature in the game. I think that's another one of the selling points. I think that a lot of care goes into this game for the fact it's been kind of sidelined. Nintendo doesn't talk a ton about it. Nobody really talks a ton about it, but people really work hard on it, is what I would say. You can see that with the nature and stuff. I guess it's worth noting you get some seasonal things like this little Halloween village over here. The events, like most mobile games, are a big driving part of content, and if you really go hard at them, you can get lots of little decorations like this. But I guess this current one would be a good demonstration. The events are pretty low commitment, I would say. You've either got events like this, where you're playing a certain extent to get the event character on your team, which is what this friendship 500 out of 500 is all about. And those you can get done pretty quickly. I remember it being a lot of work when I was first starting. Everything gets easier as you go along. But even if you're starting, I think it's a pretty, well, A, they're useful, and B, you can usually achieve it pretty easily. So these get a friend and do a raid event is one of them. The other one is basically there's no co-op person and there's no new event character, but that's usually when you get your place to build in your castle grounds. But aside from that, the dragons are supposedly the main selling point, and Cerberus here is actually from some other entity Side Game Zones. Rage of Bahamut or something. I'm not the most informed on this. But she's pretty telling about how dragons actually look in this game. She's more human than anything. And I had the brainwave last night that one of the main mascots, Not, is a fairy. But she's talked a few times about the fact that she's actually a cousin of dragons, which I think is worth noting. What do I want to pull in here? Here's a bird dragon. It's really a bird. That actually might be more confusing than all the humanoid ones. Because what I was going to say is, there's no fairies per se. They're just related to dragons. And Joan of Arc's a good example because she's got a tail, but she's mostly human. So there's a pretty big range of lizard to human going on here. Silk is ambiguously dragony and fairy-ish, and Siren's another good example. So there's fairies to an extent if you don't like dragons. But they're very, very, very human. And it might have been a sales thing. I'm not totally sure. They're not all girls. There's also him. But yeah, for a game about, developing a bond between humans and dragons, it's a bit funny how much dragons come to emulate humans. And one of the main cast members, Mim, is actually one of the large, important figures of the world, the Great Dragon herself. And transforms into a human to hang out with you. So you get a lot of intel into how humans and dragons actually relate via your fairy friend Not and your dragon friend Mim, who is a person and functions entirely in your brain as a person. But also the dragons you meet throughout the story, because the buried lead of the game is that it's supposedly about dragon pacts, is what they call them. When a human makes a dragon respect it, and it can transform into it. And story-wise, your hero is the only one who can do that. But gameplay-wise, everybody has access to transforming. And here I will show you how the dungeons sort of look. They're not very complicated at all. And what I would say it reminds me the most of, besides an action RPG, is a MOBA, like League of Legends or something, because effectively you're just tapping brainlessly through all these little encounters and charging your skills at the bottom. Currently burning, so you can't see that. There we go. Yeah, so Dragon Gauge is filling right above Desolith's face. And at the end of the level, or end of the boss fight, if you're fighting a boss, you usually get to do that. And that is sort of, I think, the heart of the gameplay, is that moment of that I'll show you. But effectively, what's a lot more exciting is charging up your little skills, like that, Howling Meteor, and synergizing with your team is what becomes fun. These will charge up your dragon. But yeah, it's a lot of doing little brainless things like this, or skip ticketing them realistically, and saving all your cool thinking and skills and synergy for later content, which just becomes like boss fights. And these boss fights here, once you're high level, you can usually beat in like literally a few hits, but I'll show you how at this point you transform. And I think that's kind of like Nintendo's little thing. I think when they think of Dragalia, it's a game about transforming into a dragon at the end of every fight. It's pretty fun. It's like piloting a mecha or something, but it's definitely not the thing that you remember most when you've been playing a lot. But yeah, so that's what it looks like. That's my fire team. And to sort of end it on an intellectual note, the idea with the elements is there's the beneficial triangle bit, like water beats fire, fire beats wind / you might want to call it grass, and then light and dark are both good against each other. And here they've got the sort of mascots for each from the main cast. And yeah, I'd say it starts being really exciting once you can just make your own elemental team for each. At that point, you'll kind of find you have to use a bunch more characters rather than just using the 5-star they give you at the beginning, which you could realistically beat the entire game with, because the story stuff and the event stuff is never very difficult. It's really brainless, honestly. So you're not going to get stopped the way you would in other mobile RPGs, maybe, ever, for not having good enough units. But where you do get stopped is sort of the hard stuff. Like each event will have many difficulties with boss. And right now, for example, I could not do this Hypnos Raid Nightmare. So you do have things you're looking forward to doing later on all the time, but there's never a time when you can't play at all. There's always something easy you could do to get materials so you can eventually get up to the good stuff. But that just about ends what I want to say. These are all my teams, which I'll probably do a more like technical talk about later, but it's a good little game. I'd say if you've never played it and you like mobile games, it's absolutely fine to try. And if I do find that I have a lot more friends who are just starting to get into it, I may do a more technical introductory, but I think this is sort of me demonstrating the heart of the game. One thing I couldn't demonstrate is how good the soundtrack is, which is entirely done by a hip-hop artist named Dalco, and it completely sets it apart from other games, but I went silent today. But yeah, it's a very stand out, very different Nintendo franchise, I would say. And what it has over things like Xenoblade or Fire Emblem or Zelda, all the other sort of anime fantasy things, is that it could just churn out a bazillion characters. And because Cygames specifically wants to pioneer it, they can make anime, and I think it has pretty big potential for a sort of zombie media anime in which you just have filler episodes forever and get to spend a little bit of time on all these different characters and stuff. So keep an eye on it, even if you don't want to play it. I think it'll become a much bigger part of Nintendo's little vision if it keeps growing. But it's a gacha game, so it has forever and it can keep growing. But for now, I hope that you enjoyed this tour, and I will certainly be back doing more.